Dr. Don Baham, a community access television producer and the host of an ongoing weekly cable television series, Conversations with Dr. Don. I'm also a retired clinical psychologist and a certified Creole, born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. The program you're about to watch, one of a series of 16 or so individual broadcasts, came about because I wanted to record and share with you highlights of the 2007 Creole Heritage Celebration in the beautiful and historic city of Natchitoches in northwest Louisiana. I wanted to do this because I'd heard good things about this organization of Creoles from a number of sources. An organization that tracks the Creole diaspora? When I grew up in New Orleans in the 30s and 40s, I knew of no formal organization of Creoles like the Creole Heritage Foundation of today. I only knew of the local, more or less, neighborhood social organizations like the Autocrat Club in New Orleans. Well, like so many young Creoles in the 40s, returning from military service to other parts of the country, I lost touch to a large degree with the New Orleans Creole-style community. Now, the city of Los Angeles Creole community in the 50s through the 70s provided a modicum of Creole community, but nothing like the Creole community in New Orleans in the 30s and 40s. And then moving out of Los Angeles proper into the larger Los Angeles area suburban community further isolated me from my cultural upbringing, and not to mention moving to Oregon 13 years ago. Ever find yourself in a place where you see someone that has a look or a flavor about them that suggests that they might be a Creole or whatever, only to discover that it is more how they look physically that caused your misperception? Now, of course, I love where I live now in the rainy Pacific Northwest, but if there are any Creoles up here, I haven't seen any. So that's why I decided that I had to come to the celebration. And I'm so very glad I did. I can't put into words the feelings of joy and connection that I felt at the celebration and am still feeling today. That feeling of joy and connection was certainly encouraged and facilitated by the warm and gracious welcome and ongoing support and assistance of Mrs. Janet Rabare Colson, the Executive Director of the NSU Creole Heritage Center, and her eager, dedicated staff. I can't thank Mrs. Colson and her staff enough. I believe that the flavor and essence of what it's like to be Creole comes through in the speeches and presentations that you will see and hear in the series of broadcasts that comprise the complete program. I believe that whether or not you're a Creole, you're bound to learn more about us, our heritage, and our love of life. I hope that after viewing any or all of this series of programs, you viewers might become encouraged to find more of the fun and love of life in your own particular culture. So, enough of my talk, and on with the program.
information. What we have this afternoon, by the way, I'm referring to pages 18 and 19 in your commemorative history book. And so we are here in the information session for between 1 and 4 today. I'm going to present to you Dr. Maurice Martinez. Dr. Martinez is a professor at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. He is a Louisiana native son and hailed from New Orleans. His film, Too White to Be Black, Too Black to Be White, a story of the New Orleans Creole. And so he's going to come to us this afternoon and tell us about that. Would you help me welcome Dr. Maurice Martinez?
Good old New Orleans welcome. Eh là-bas, cousin. Ça va, cher. Grandma told me there'd be days like this, but I didn't believe her. Yes, oh man, no. Well, I listened very carefully this morning to the discussions, and I have a few things that I'd like to add to that in terms of clarification of identity. And I think that when we talk about Creole, we should put it in the context of a larger social order. That is, we know who we are because we share, and if you apply the rules for identification or identity for any ethnic group, the first thing that comes off the table is a sense of peoplehood, a shared experience. You go to bed knowing you're Creole, and you wake up the next morning and you know you're Creole. The same thing would apply to other ethnic groups, Italians, American Indians. When you go to bed, an Indian, you know you're not a wannabe person. And so within the framework of culture, I think we need to define it. Now, anthropologists would give us maybe a couple of hundred different definitions of culture. But I have one that I think applies across the board because it's within this four-letter word, R-U-L-E, rules, or L-A-W-S, laws. And it has to do with power and who has the power to control and who has the power to set the laws which govern the behavior of its inhabitants. So if we define culture, consider this: a set of rules for living created by a group of people based upon three things: who they think they are, where they think they are, and the perceived resources that are available to them. Who do they think they are? My pa used to say it all the time: who the hell you think you are? We always knew who we were, because when you met somebody new, the first question out of the mouth was, what's your mama's maiden name? And with that mama's maiden name, they could go back and tell you your whole history, including your third grade school teacher. So we knew who we were. And we had opportunities to bond, not only in some of the ways that were expressed earlier, but men bonded on one level, women bonded on another. And New Orleans in particular has always been, as Satchmo said, organization-minded. Everybody belonged to a club of some kind, social and pleasure club, carnival club, that sort of thing. The men bonded around two things: jobs, which were mainly the trades, bricklaying, plastering, and hunting. Opening day in Madisonville, duck hunting season, you met everybody. I wrote an article about that. Hey, boy, come over here and meet your cousin. And you knew all of your family members. There was a bonding there. where they think they are, well, that's very complex, because we were defined by the locus of control that was from without. And the locus of control was based upon the legacy of slavery and color. And so we get in Louisiana the 132nd law. Anybody who's 132nd African descent is a Negro, period. And that stayed around for a long time. I was in Germany giving a keynote speech once, and I asked the Germans, I said, if you're 31 parts German and 1 part African, does that make you a black German? How silly or how powerful that 132nd drop must be. And so identity as to who we are, power in terms of where we are in the social order, and then what resources. What do you do for a living? What do you do to put food on the table? What kinds of things happen there? And so within that structure, when we look at it historically, up to 1863, we have slavery. Emancipation Proclamation, and I agree with everybody, know your history in that other panel. Enslaved people of color, Africans, were released. A period of Reconstruction was probably the best period in the history of this country for people of color. Reconstruction from 1863, or the end of the Civil War, up until 1877, when we had this Rutherford B. Hayes was elected, the Bush of his time, and he removed the federal troops that were protecting us. We had integrated schools, we had political power, we had businesses, we had people intermarrying. We didn't have this. Even if you look at the census of 1890, we had labels in the census, octoroon, quadroon. It was Booker T. Washington who came along, I don't know, maybe because he had more melanin in his skin, that gave the Census Bureau this idea of identity of two, black or white. But we were distinct and being recognized back then. And so what happens in families? You had a choice. You could identify with Negro or you could identify with white. If phenotypically you looked white, you had good hair, light complexion, your job opportunities were much better. You didn't become disenfranchised in 1896 and and all the way up through Brown in 1954. And so what we get then is the phenomenon of the passage blanc. I have some more remarks, but I'm going to pause at this moment and let the film run. There are 2 acts in the film. The film is 84 minutes long. And I asked somebody in the lobby, I said, how much does 84 go into 60? She said, I don't know, baby, but I'm 60 and I sure would like to try it. You see, now that's what we got. That's what we have in this culture. The ability to laugh at life. Anyway, let's start. We'll see Act 1, and then I want to break. I'll let the technician, he's been prepped. We'll throw the lights. We'll listen to a part of this, and then I'd like to reserve about 15 minutes at the end. Before you do that, though, let me give you something to think about. In sociology, there are 3 words: assimilation, acculturation, and isolation. Assimilation destroys. Means you give up who you are and you try to be something else. You give up all of your background and everything that you bring, and you try to become something else. Acculturation distills, and isolation preserves. Look at the groups we just talked about. Cattle, if you're in isolation. So, segregation with the 132nd rule isolated us. And those of us who couldn't pass kept a lot going. assimilation, and it starts with ASS. If you look in the political arena, ASS, let me give you some examples. Clarence Thomas, Condoleezza Rice, assimilated beyond repair, destroyed. Acculturation distills Martin Luther King. He wanted to, all of us hold hands together, and I think that's a beautiful dream. Isolation, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey. You don't want us, we don't want you. So which do we choose? Think about that as you watch the film. Too white to be black, too black to be white, the New Orleans Creole.
Creole, okay, I got Creole okra, Chef.
Oh, give me 2 pounds of okra.
I can give you a good price on okra. I can give you the okra for 5
Yeah,
cents.
now you.
I can give it you 5 cents a pound.
Oh, well,
okra.
give me 3 pounds then, if it's that cheap.
Yeah,
Oh,
now you.
what you can give me for lagnac, though?
Well, check with anything you want. Look around and see what you want.
Too bad you don't have some good pickle meat on this truck to go in those red beans
No,
I'm gonna cook.
we can't keep that on the truck. We can't keep that.
I guess I have to go by Charlie's and get me some pickle meat.
One, two, three. I spied Josefa in the alley. Come on out.
Lizard, show me your blanket.
Lament of a Jean de Couleur, a Creole of color. A confused young man looked at his parent, that's French Creole for Godfather, and asked, "What am I? Who am I? Who are my ancestors' kin? I'm fair, my brother's brown, and my sister's of olive skin. My mama says Creole. What is that? Am I supposed to know? Where did my ancestors live, and which way did they go?"
Petit Jésus, je vous donne mon petit cœur. Faites-moi par votre grâce devenir grand et sage, obéir à ma mère, à mon père et tout le monde. S'il vous plaît, Jésus.
A typical Creole family was a family mixed with white, black, a touch of Spanish, and in some cases a bit of Indian blood. And I think that can count a lot of New Orleans families like that. The disadvantages, because we were just a little different, some people didn't take to that. They gave us a rough time sometimes. The advantage, my daddy went into the painting business, and I hate to say it, but on many occasions he didn't tell the people what he was. They accepted him for the way he looked. Some cases people found out later, but once you've worked for them, if they liked your work, then you would be called back. If you were real dark-skinned, often they wouldn't give you the chance to get in the front door.
The Creole is like the prototype of a melting pot man. He has a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So I think what makes Creole is that you have to recognize that you are part of many ethnicities. You're not totally African American. You're not totally French. You're not totally Spanish. You're a combination of everything. And I think recognizing that diversity is unique because you say, this is who I am. You accept me the way I am. I have no control over the fact that I have 7 ethnic groups in 3 generations.
We are mixture of Caucasians and Africans. That's in the family, both on mother's side of the family, on my daddy's side of the family. So you might say we are thoroughbred Creoles. One thing I can remember, my mother on the telephone, when she talked to her sisters, they always spoke in French. And of course, whenever they were talking about me, I knew because they couldn't say Lord in French. So I always got a kick out of that.
Honey, we went from dark brown to blue-eyed blondes. My sister was a platinum blonde as a child, a blonde with blue eyes. And I have first cousins that are dark brown skin. I had one uncle that was brown and 3 uncles that were fair. One had blue eyes. Naturally, the brown one was teased and talked about as a kid because they do that in their own families. They call them the black sheep of the family and things like that.
Many of the children of darker complexions felt inferior. These children never fully were able to enjoy being children. They were so busy worrying about what they looked like. If you were brown, but you had nice hair, you know, if your hair would move, if you had good hair, well then you were with that crowd with the light skin, who may not have had nice hair, but they had the fair skin. So there was a lot of categorizing, and the children who felt inferior, they carried this forever.
Remember, the Creole word to some people, they get really upset over it. One of my co-workers, I mentioned that word just a few weeks ago, and he told me, he said, that's when you want to be white and you don't want to be black. But to some extent, we are in the middle. We don't want to be uppity. All I want to do is live my life and go on.
My daddy was a very independent person. He loved business. He loved dairy farming. He loved cows. My father received a tax bill for $600 on the farm and the cattle and whatever. He met with Judge Adams and protested, and he said since he did not have schools for his children, he didn't see why he had to pay it. He said if he had to pay it, he would send his children to that school, that white school right down the highway. Judge Adams told him for $3,000, I'll have all your records changed and everybody will be white. And he told him go to hell, and that was it.
How can I really know how I came to be? How come we're different complexions? What am I supposed to see? Parrain, the youth besieged him. Tell me, why are we so many colors? What does Creole really mean? Who can I call my brothers? Am I black or white? I do not understand. What is my true birthright? Am I to wander all through life with fear of one kind or another? of being denied by one race and admonished by the other? What can I do, parent? How can I make my mark? Unfair enough to pass for white? Is this the way I start?
I think the passe blanc, if you want to translate loosely, passing for white, I think that was a survival technique. Here you had people who were physically Caucasian, blonde hair, blue eyes, skin extremely white, and you were in a society where you had to identify yourself as black or white. Blacks didn't look at you as black. Whites would look at you as white until they found out you were black. So, for survival, many of them left New Orleans. A lot of them went to California to assimilate into white America.
They moved from here to make decent salaries. You couldn't make any money here. People were poor. Most of the men were trading. And those that were able to get a college education, what were they? School teachers. You know what they paid a school teacher? They still pay them nothing. So can you imagine what they paid them 50 years ago? Nothing. Most of them went up there, and they all did well. They bought nice homes, which they probably would never have bought here. They were bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers. We had the best. New Orleans had the best.
Typically, if Creoles moved from New Orleans, they moved to California because of the fact that they could pass white and that we got better jobs, better housing. Others who, somebody might say, oh, there's a passe blanc. People were not passe blancs, just didn't walk around with a sign on your back saying I'm black. You could have easily just gone into the bathroom labeled white only. Yeah, I remember doing it as a child, and I told my mom, I said, I'm not going to that bathroom, because I remember last time we were at Woolworth, the colored only bathroom was really dirty. And it's not that people dirtied it more, they just didn't clean it enough. I'm going in the other bathroom, it can't be worse. And sure enough, it was cleaner. You know, nobody questioned it. It's not that passe blanc, it's that you took, you know, advantage of opportunities.
When the bus was segregated with a portion of a board this long for our colored patrons, some of the passe blancs would go, you know, on that side. Believe it or not, some of the Negroes didn't like to say, she is. She is a Creole. And it was called a disturbance. Sometimes, if the driver was ugly, he could have you arrested for sitting in a white place. But Marlo's sister was almost white. Believe it or not, she sat in a white place. She said, hi, kid. She honked at her colored friend, and she was sitting behind the screen. But she was just lucky that they didn't tell on her.
I applied for a job in the French quarters at one candy store, which had requested light-skinned colored girl. Well, I went for the job, and he told me I was not the kind of light-skinned colored girl he wanted because I would look like them. So I decided then there was only one other thing I could do. I did not live as white, but I did work as white at a few jobs. It wasn't too many places that Creoles could actually make a halfway decent living, because we never made a good living unless you worked as white. Then you got a little better living. But if you worked as colored, your funds was insufficient at all times.
The ones who were physically able to do it felt they could be more successful if they were white. They could compete better without the race label. I could see their point. I may not have approved of it, but then I wasn't able to do it. You know, the opinion would have to come from someone who was able to do it and chose not to.
When their children went to school, it really wasn't integrated. So they sent them where they all go, to St. Louis Cathedral, you know. That's where most of them went. One girl in particular that we came up with, we would all be on a bus. We'd get off at Bourbon and Orleans because my school was in the French quarters. And she'd stay on to go a few blocks up to St. Louis Cathedral, St. Louis School. And we would be getting, some of the kids would really call out words, Mouse Eye Boy and all kinds of stuff. We knew her, but it wasn't her fault. We were young, but we realized it now. Her parents made her go, her and her brother. But they went, along with a whole lot of others that we knew.
Oh, my family is Pasablons. The Richo, some of the Richo family, my grandma didn't see them after they became adults because they all went white. Not for the real sexual reason, but it was just for the advancement in their style of living. If you look at the religious thing, hey, that's never been on equal ground at all, because they practiced segregation since they came here, and it's not really much better now.
What I feel bad about is the fact that in a lot of Creole families, many members had to pass for jobs, and in all honesty, it destroyed a lot of Creole families because we can't have a family reunion. If we do, we'll have only half a family. The families are gone. I got more cousins who live as white than who live as Creoles.
His parent elder, with piercing eyes, replied compassionately, "I know, my son, you want to know how all this came to be. Listen to this poem a lady wrote about your history."
The Making of a Creole of Color, Soup a la Black Creole, by Marianne Jacques Newman. Put your Africans and Frenchmen in a large iron skillet. Then add Indians. Stir slowly over a moderate fire until your roux is light brown. Add Spaniards and Germans. Stir and cook until mixture is a rich brown. This takes about 100 years. Then add Italians and cook slowly for another 60 years. Have ready 1 dozen Chinese and 2 heaping tablespoons of Irishmen. Be very careful of browning this mixture as it burns quickly. When well browned, pour this mixture into the large pot containing the Anglo-Americans. Cover tightly and simmer slowly for about 35 years. Remove from flame, leave covered an additional 25 years. A few drops of multi-ethnic liquid seasoning adds materially to a piquant flavor. This is the secret of a very tasty soup. Note, this soup is a rich source of the U.S. recommended daily allowance of brotherhood and sisterhood and will serve all America.
Creoles are predominantly Catholic. We're a Catholic city. And there are different saints for different occasions. For example, if you lose something and you want to find it, you pray to St. Anthony. St. Rock, call your dog. If you see a strange dog, you say, St. Rock, call your dog. St. Rock, call your dog. Now I've seen that work. Now I'm not sure if the dog just got tired and crossed the street, but remember when I was little, and I was always told to do that. Don't run or anything from the dog. And I say, St. Rock, call your dog. St. Rock, call your dog. And the dog crossed the street. Oh, St. Anne, find me a man. That's a typical saying. I've heard that. So if you want a spouse or a mate, you pray to St. Anne. Now if you want to get rid of one, you pray to St. Rita to make him walk out the door. For the eyes, you pray to St. Lucy. And St. Jude is for hopeless causes. But I also heard that St. Jude is a vengeful saint. So if you offer him something, and you say, I'm going to say a rosary every day at such and such a time, and you neglect or fail to do so, that he will take something else that you treasure.
Well, I'm a good Catholic. My mama told me that. She said, Junior, if you do so many bad things, why you want to eat meat on Friday? I said, all right, Ma. And I burn a candle every day. And my candle is St. Jude. And St. Jude's good to rip.
The colored people had 5 pews in the back of the church where the colored people could sit down. There was no place else in those days for people to go. We had to go to that church. But not long after that, Corpus Christi and all the families around here, they were all Corpus Christi. That was one of the biggest parishes in Louisiana.
We were Catholic. We went to Corpus Christi Church for catechism and for Mass. If you did not go to Mass, then you did nothing the rest of the day. You couldn't play, you couldn't go to the movies, you couldn't do anything, because if you couldn't reach your obligation, then you could have no fun.
After dinner, weekdays, you came in for the rosary at 6 or 6:30, whenever it came on the radio. Came in, everybody came in. Around the bed, we said a rosary. There was always an altar in our home, you know, and with a lighted vigil. That was all my life.
We were a Catholic family. There was one Catholic church in Kenner when we moved to Kenner. We did not attend church. The priest at that church came to my house and spoke to my dad and wanted to know why we did not go to church, and they told him, we were not going to sit in the back of your church. He told Dad that he would reserve a special pew for the Dupree family. And Daddy said, no, if we can't sit anywhere in the church, we don't want to sit in your church at all. Eventually, we returned back to St. Joan of Arc. We used to go to church because somebody put us in the car, bring us to church, and bring us home.
We went on a picnic one day with all Creoles, and this priest was on the truck with the rest of the parishioners, and we told him that we made up 50 to 60% of the church. Why did we have to sit in the last row of the, what you call, say, when we go to church next Sunday, we go and sit up in the front of the church. That was the Creoles at my time.
Holy Family was really an old place, but the sisters were wonderful. We all had real good grades, or we couldn't stay in there. We had to be well behaved, or our mothers would be notified and we would be punished. So naturally, we had to be good children. So I enjoyed the Holy Family.
Honey, Sister Dolores kept me on my knees on hard wooden floors for hours in front of the Blessed Mother, praying because the devil had hold of my skirt tail. That's what she would tell me. Everybody had a tale to tell you about Sister Dolores. You prayed when you went. You prayed before you left. You prayed at lunch. You wore long skirts. We could not wear blouses like Xavier Prep. Short sleeve, regular white school blouses. We wore long sleeves, heavy cotton blouses. Somebody from Europe gave them that idea. Probably Henriette DeLille.
Henriette DeLille, who's up right now for canonization. And if that's done, she would be the first, Creole woman of color from Louisiana to be declared a saint.
The Vatican has described her as an African-American saint. And the big brouhaha is that she should not be called an African-American. She should be called a French Creole or a Louisiana Creole. As a matter of fact, Henriette DeLille could have legally been declared as white. She chose not to.
She was a free woman of color, and she was wealthy, and she devoted her life and all her money to the slave children, to build a school for them, and she founded that order of nuns, of the Holy Family nuns, Henriette.
My boy, you see, somebody once said propinquity and personality are more than a match for prejudice. The offspring of this intermixing, this cross-fertilization, this so-called miscegenation produce phenotypes from very dark skin to very light. And everybody in the 7th Ward on Priya Street behind their door papa blinds began to know, what went on at night.
I don't know exactly when we came here, but they had a cadre of about 80, 90 people, maybe a couple of hundred, I think. Maybe 200 came when the first French boat came here. They had women, they had men, they had children, they had indentured servants, they had slaves. Somebody had to get together. I mean, they didn't have enough people. They didn't have enough men or women to go around. regardless if it's white or non-white. So that inbreeding, that was just part of the inbreeding. Inbreeding was far, far before they came to Louisiana.
Plaçage is the French word, to describe the liaison between the white planters in particular and descendants of slaves and the white masters. And we have any number of names, for them. The quadroon, the octoroon, the mulatto. For the most part, at least when I was growing up, folks did not make that kind of a distinction. You were Creole. And in many instances, the descendants of the Plaçage were treated very honorably. Many were sent away to school, some to France to school. The family was maintained. And even some of them, we've got to admit, acted like their progenitor masters and also had slaves. And oftentimes had children with those slaves.
They had a lot of beautiful Creole women, beautiful. And they had picked the prettiest Creole women and dressed them gorgeous to dance with all of these Frenchmen, mostly Frenchmen, that lived here, came here from France, and they were big shots, and a lot of them ended up with them as their mistresses. And that's how we began. That's how we started. They started having children. These women were free women of color to start with. So they could put them up in a house. They had nice homes in the French quarters. They gave their children their names. A lot of people want to say, and some of it might be true, that a lot of these French names that we carry are the names of our masters, our forefathers, their masters. But it's not true. A lot of the names are actually our names. Even though he couldn't marry because he had his other family, and it was against the law and all of that. So he had this second family, but these were his legitimate children. They were illegitimate per se, but they were his children, and they carried his name. And a lot of them went to Europe to be educated. And that's why we had a lot of free men of color that were in big positions at one time in the city,
Seeing what happened after Reconstruction, after the end of Reconstruction, where the Code Noir, the black codes were established, which meant that whether you were Creole and a Creole who looked like white, if you identified as Creole, as far as you were concerned, the dominant group, the whites, whether they were the Northerners or the Southerners, they identified you as black. Of course, back in those days, the term was colored, de couleur. When you translate that into English, it's colored.
If you were a 132nd black blood, then you were considered black. And I think that law was recently changed.
My father, I don't know what he thought he was, but he sure didn't think he was black. I don't guess he did, because he never registered me as black. Because in those days, you were born in a house, not everybody, but most of them. See, my mother had a midwife. Your father went up to register you. Maybe a couple days afterwards, your mother was still recuperating from delivering you. It seemed like back then, I remember, I'm going to be 69 in a couple of months. So 69 years ago, maybe they looked at you. My daddy may not have told the people that he didn't look like he was colored at all. So maybe when they looked at him, they just gave him a birth. In those days, they didn't put anything except if you were colored, they put colored. If you weren't, they didn't put anything. That's what I'm surmising.
After having my children, especially my last child, I started reflecting because when I was signing her birth certificate, they had colored, Negro, black, African American. So I was in a militancy stage then. I put black on her birth certificate. And then I started really thinking, and I said, okay, I have one child. I had Negro on her birth certificate. I had Negro. My husband had colored. So I said, I think I'm going to change this to at least the two sisters will be both of the same ethnicity.
By the way, I still think color was the best description of us and not black because we have all colors. We're like a bouquet of roses. Everyone is a different color. I have 5 children, and there's no 2 children the same shade. And none of them's even my shade, so colored was really the best way to describe our people.
And you know how people get angry with me because I don't use the term African American for myself. I am not a hyphenated American. That's number one. And if I chose to be a hyphenated American, why would I go to my great-great-grandmother who was African, who I knew nothing about? I am black, and I'm proud to be black. I've never denied being black. I've never been a passable, never tried to pass for nothing. And I've always, when they ask me my race, I'm black. But I'm not African American. And I resent them trying to make me, because some black man woke up one morning and said, we're going to call all the blacks African American. Who in the hell gave him the authority to change? We went from colored to Negro to black to now African American. Well, you don't decide for me what I am. So if you want to be African American, I'm happy. You happy, I'm tickled pink. You African American, I don't have a problem with it.
The mixing brought about an unknown race.
I think at this point,
What better
because
name
of
than
time,
Creole? Creole
throw the
found
lights.
a place.
No, y'all want to go on?
Walking.
Ave Maria.
Talking. How's your mom and them?
Okay.
Dressing, putting beauty on display.
The thing is, we started
Cooking in a
15 minutes
special
late,
way.
and
Lots
they
of
pressed
season?
for
Yes, yes.
time.
Gumbo, the word gumbo, which is our basic cuisine, comes from
Well,
Africa.
we're almost to the
Gumbo
end of
is
Act
what
1.
West
I'll
Africans
tell you what,
call
we
okra.
have some
And,
screenings
this was
of it in
French-
the other room. I
French-speaking
know,
African
but
Togo.
you can
And
get
there
a
was
copy.
gumbo, as they call it.
See that pretty lady standing there?
That is our food. That's
Yeah.
it.
That's my
Something
wife.
else, Creoles.
She's a coyote.
They have
You know what a
two
coyote
And we
is?
tried to
It's what happened when a
explain
coyote made love to a poodle.
You have Creole okra gumbo.
And so we have some copies. If you want to get one, they're $20. And if you're a nun, it's $15. What I'd like to do at this point is thank you very much, Tex. And I know I wish we had the time to see it all because we get into experiences one after the other. Vic Vavasour, some really potent people, and but
If I may, and I have to be the bad guy here, we have to stay on time because we have other people that come up behind this film. Now, even in its entirety, it was more than the hour that Dr. Martinez has. So in all fairness, we have to stop so that we can stay on time. Everybody can appreciate being on time, I know. And it gives us an opportunity to purchase. You've given us a teaser, is what that is. He's given us a teaser, so we have an opportunity to purchase the tape. I definitely want one. And but we must move on and stay on task.
But we're not moving on until I acknowledge the honorary mayor of Vascoville. This last lady you saw, Jackie Sardi, please stand up. Jackie is so proud, and she knows so much about being a Creole. Who in the hell gave him the authority to call me African American? And we have many more such stories. And perhaps you have some questions right this point or comments. I brought in here the paper bag test. You know, in New Orleans, you had to put your hand. If your skin was darker than the paper bag, you couldn't go into the autocrat club. and your parents would say, your father say, don't you bring none of those booger bears home. Awful those old people were. It had nothing to do with what's inside. But you know, it wasn't their fault. This is the point I want to make. This was the locus of control. Puerto Ricans go through the same thing. I lived in New York for 24 years and worked there, and the Puerto Ricans could be the Creoles of the Hispanic community because they have the same thing. Pelo malo, pelo bueno, bad hair, good hair. If you're African, you're grifo. You don't want to go there because your chances for survival in this land of epidermis, America, were greater if you had European features. That's the bottom line. And for anyone to sit up here, I'm sorry, and say color doesn't matter, it's a farce. It does matter. It still does matter. Now, until we move from that, I don't know what's going to cause, I think the young people today are transcending that to some extent. But back then, it was, I mean, you could have 4 PhDs and have $1 million in your pocket, but when you hit that door, if you didn't have that phenotypical